My name's Brian Dougherty, and I was asked to come here today and talk about design and sustainability. I'm actually a horticulturalist and landscape architect by profession, had worked at OSU Oklahoma City for 15 years, and then was asked by Mr. Kirkpatrick to come over to the Community Foundation. I think when you hear what the other people have talked about here and the other presenters, you're sitting there going, you know, good people want to do good things. There's a lot of times, and you know, the Community Foundation's mission is helping people help the community. So what I do is try to help bring that added benefit of the technical direction as to how do we activate that place? How do we get something going? So, and I believe very much in a lead by example. Mrs. Margaret Annis Boys left her estate to the Community Foundation for beautification of public space about 26 years ago. For the first 4 or 5 years that it was in and it was presenting problems, they would turn around and try to activate space at a school or at a park or somewhere. But a lot of times they were very single focused and they really weren't able to activate the way they want to. They really didn't have any shelf life. They were quick, they were done, and then we were kind of moving on to the next thing. Mr. Kirkpatrick and I had worked very closely with him for years. He asked me about coming to the Community Foundation. He said, Brian, I want you to add some extra technical expertise. Sit there and work with these people on the front end. Let's see if we can have some sustainability in these projects. Let's see how we can do. So sometimes it was health directed and wellness. Sometimes it was beautification. Sometimes it was neighborhood enhancement. Sometimes it was quality of life. Sometimes it was activating for the kids. There were so many different directions, but a lot of times is how do we make this happen and how do we engage all this. So I think we started looking at what the impacts were and what the missing opportunities were. And we turned around and said, how can we? Now, a lot of times there are revocable permits. There's all kinds of bureaucratic, leverage that has to happen and all. But you turn around and you say, how do you make things happen? And I think what has come to me so often is it is good people want to do good things all the time. A lot of times somebody doesn't want to be a leader, but they'll follow if they have a good plan. So what I'd like to do today is just talk about when I came 18 years ago, one of the directives was, okay, let's look at public space, let's look at where we can activate neighborhoods on a positive mode. This was a lot for children. Some of it was for neighborhoods, for families, for anything, but it was like that. And so we turned around and we looked at spaces, public spaces, and I'm going to give you 2 examples. One was Clean and Beautiful Schools we started. We turned around and looked at Oklahoma City School District alone, and we said, where are public spaces? You say, to mow at one time, 1,286 acres just to mow inside that district. That is 1,286 acres of opportunity if we want to look at it that way. That's a lot of outside public space. That's a lot of space that can become a community hub, can be something that can be real positive. And that's before you include Putnam City and Edmond and Moore and all that in it. That's a lot of public acres. So what we turned around and did, we said, okay, how do we activate? Because there were a lot of people, we'd get calls all the time. We'd like to do a walking track. We'd like to, put in another soccer field. We'd like to turn around and just give a place for the Cub Scouts and the Boy Scouts to meet. We'd like to have something like that. So we turned around, we said it has to be quick and it has to be effective. We turned around and I just went back to my landscape architecture world and turned around and we just started with aerial photographs. It was immediate. And now, of course, you can pull them off Google Earth. At that time, we went with an aerial photography company, and we'd buy the rights to do it, scaled. I could go out to that school that afternoon, never seen it before, and we'd have people from the neighborhood, people from administration, teachers, people from the local churches, and we just walk around. Say what would make a difference. I think at first the Community Foundation trustees thought it was all going to be about trees through the Margaret Annis Boys Trust. Real fast we found out it was everything from the curb to the face of the building. It was where the American flag might be. It was where there could be a stage. It's where there could be a learning circle. It was any number, where to pick up the kids, where to drop off the kids, where to put the basketball goals. We started finding out it wasn't that they didn't want basketball goals. They just didn't want them hidden back in the place where less than desirable things happen. So there was a lot of that we started doing. And we went back in and we just turned around and did an itemized list. Anything that came up was fair game, whether it was small or big, whether it was a PTA or whether it was a bond issue type, and you just listed. A week later, given this technical, trying to recraft it and trying to take what they said and put it back together, we listed them. And we listed them, and when we came back and we say, okay, this is what you said. It would be better to have a new preschool playground over here. Why don't we reorient the soccer field so these teams can play? Why don't we do that? It was really pretty amazing because everybody would turn around and they divide them into major projects, secondary projects, and small projects. Some were bond issue, some were PTA type, and some were things we could do tomorrow. And then they prioritized them. It was a phenomenal success with those schools that were doing them. It was instantly people started activating and making things happen. And we participated in some of it financially with them through the Community Foundation. I think lessons learned from that was that it was good people wanting to do good things, and you just had to kind of help make things happen. Out of that, we turned around and did 132 schools. Somebody said, well, how did you do 132 or over 100? And I said, the interesting thing was when we did these bulleted lists and we prioritized them, nobody ever challenged anything in 132 different schools because we listened. We listened and we put it together. Every neighborhood was different, every school was different, but we tried to do that and we tried to set them up. I think, and sometimes it was activation. Sometimes it was that they wanted a program to happen with all the kids walking around Oklahoma and it was a track. Sometimes it was a track and we needed to have a program developed around it, so we worked together. I think as we've continued to go, we do a lot with parks and public space. We've taken some really, really rough parks. If you look at Tulsa Park over there, when I first visited, they said, Brian, don't get out of your car. There's all kinds of gang activity. And I'm like, this is a park. We got to get out and walk this place. And you do it. Now you go 100 kids a night playing in that park. But I think it was because it was positive momentum in the way we tried to activate it. We always start with master plan. Mr. Kirkpatrick taught me something that was so valuable. He said, Brian, you're going to be able to impact more on the end of your pencil than any other time in the life. When we're turning around and thinking through this, then you turn around and you take that aerial and you say, where's the best place for that soccer field? Where's the best place? How do we activate this? How do we connect this back to the church or the school? How do we do these? And then you start activating back through. Old professor of mine said one time, never draw more in one day than you can erase that night. And it's very, very true. So it's always changing. I'm always sitting there back through that. I'm always thinking about that long-term sustainability. Sometimes the simplest plan is by far the most effective. No question about it. Sometimes it's that simplicity because if I make that so simple, then it has more of a life for long-term sustainability. Every project starts, safety trumps everything, function is second, and aesthetics is third. Super important. Don't ever start with aesthetics, trying to beautify. First, look at the safety, then look at how this is going to function, and then how are we going to turn around and make this work. It's, keep it so simple. I think intergenerational space, it's interesting. There was a point in landscape architecture world where everything was for adults, and then it was all for children, and then it was all for this population. I said, parks are for people. Parks and those school grounds should be intergenerational whenever we can. And I think one of the, a great testament is there's a parks director in Dallas that I have tremendous respect for. Inner city project that he was doing for kids, disadvantaged kids. And it was doing okay, but he watched parents and caregivers park in the parking lot because it was deemed somewhat unsafe. And they'd wait, and then they'd wait for the kids to be finished, and then the kids go back to the cars and they drive back home. And one parent came out one day and he said, is there anything we could help you with while we're waiting in the parking lot? He said, yeah. Now it's a phenomenal, successful program. What they did is they activated this parent program at the same time the kids were, and now there's this phenomenal support. He said 10 times bigger than they would have ever dreamt. And all they did was recognize that these parents were in the parking lot waiting. So I think that there's a lot of things. Some of the lessons learned, I learned through community, through clean, beautiful schools and parks. 2 boys will sit on a bench. 3 girls will sit on a bench. You do a sitting wall, 100 kids that don't know each other will sit next to each other. It's really, just watch it at a park. Just watch if it's not those individual benches. I think when we started Foursquare, we'd do Foursquare and we'd paint because that was inexpensive. We could take that old parking lot that's not used during the non-pickup hours and you do a Foursquare. But sometimes that dominant group controlled that Foursquare, or that dominant group controlled those 2 basketball goals. We try an experiment. We started adding 4 more goals. Now all at once there were 6 games of half-court going. Everybody loved it. We started adding 3 more Foursquare courts. Everybody started doing it and participating. So I think sometimes it's these little things that we can do that make a big difference. At Hilldale School, Price started with 2 kids. He was playing an instrument. 2 kids were interested in it. And so next thing we know, we kind of open it up. 87 kids now. They've moved it from a D school to a B school. What did we do? We came out and took an area that was all fenced in. I said, why is this fence even out here? We got the fence down, worked with the superintendent, and built a stage. Now the kids have a stage. The stage also is a great place for lunch. It's also the place where buddy benches are. It's also the place. It was so simple in some ways, but I think it took all of us thinking together about these little. The other thing we did, we had a track. Parents wouldn't sit and come for soccer games and watch the kids on the track. Price was determined to get that happening. Go, Brian, how can we do that? I said, let's go back to that 2 boys and 3 girls on a bench. So we just put a row of benches. We funded a row of benches that go all the way down the track. Every night there's an event now. It's full of parents. We never were able to get the parents out of the cars until we did some of this simple activation. So I think we did portable soccer goals in the park behind there. Yeah, we had to go back to the school board and we had to go back and say, let's activate. They don't have enough room. Let's go to the public park, but let's really monitor it. It's going to be safe. It's going to function, and let's make those happen. I think there's numerous things like that. So we did sand volleyball court at one school. Nobody thought that would work. Huge success. Huge success. Neighborhood comes. Futsal course at Rollingwood. They wanted basketball goals in the neighborhood. They wanted soccer goals in the school. So we did one futsal course. The gate opens during the day for the kids to play, and at night that gate's closed, and the one to the neighborhood opens up. So again, I think it's thinking through some of these. Again, it's safe, it's thought through. I think in closing, I would say master plan the space, utilizing everyone that should be involved. And that's everyone that wants to be involved. There was a gentleman one time, and I was over here in Northeast Oklahoma City working with one of the schools, and a gentleman, they were talking about wanting some new benches. And the gentleman caught me after, and he was very quiet. He came up to me, he says, you know, I think I could build your benches. And I said, really? I'd love that. He says, I said, you have some knowledge of that? And he goes, yeah. So he caught me later, and I said, oh, have you done other things? Got to know him a little more. He built all the general's desks at Tinker Air Force Base, but he had never had that opportunity to turn around and do something in his own neighborhood. He was a master craftsman. I think don't focus on the money. Yes, we do a lot of grants, and I love doing grants. Don't start with a grant. Start with a project, but rather the opportunities for success. So often I'm working with a public housing project right now, and it was to reactivate a spine of sidewalks that hadn't had trees forever on it. The kids are out of the shadows now. It's the perfect time. 632 kids. Let's reactivate it. So I brought it about a new grant, and we're going to do trees all the way down it. But to have the success, we want 100% success. So we've broken it into 2 projects, 2 phases. We got 100% success this first phase this summer, and so today they're planning the second phase of them. We will have 100% times 2. I think if they wouldn't have had the capacity to maintain everything if we would have laid out the whole project at once and say, now maintain this whole. So a lot of times it's healthy in this world of immediate gratification. It's really healthy sometimes for us to slow down and phase it in. Connect as many dots as possible. You've heard health. We've heard economic development. We've heard quality of life. We've heard that. Connect those dots. They're out there for us too. And I think a focus on the highest level of impact and the lowest amount of ongoing maintenance. Mr. Kirkpatrick used to say, Brian, we can build it, but we'll spend 20 times this amount of money maintaining it over time if we don't. If we can reduce that ongoing maintenance, then we've succeeded. We've turned around and done our own Central Park when Olmsted was going to be given an award 10 years later, and he said, if it's existing for 25 years, you can give me that award. Now it's celebrating 150 years. I would say always leave room and time to celebrate that success and then pass the project on to the next generation, the next group to build from. I think so often that next group has to start at ground zero. We would like to sit there and have it such positive momentum that you pass it on to the next group. So I appreciate it. Thank you.